Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay. Thank you very much for coming to our September training. So today we will be talking about English proficiency tests. Proficiency means ability. Like, can you speak English? Can you speak English very well? So-so? Not very well? That's your proficiency. So there are many tests in Japan and in the world. Today we will talk about those tests. There are three main points today. Number one, the most common tests in Japan. Which tests do Japanese people take? We will compare the tests. And also we will look at Japan's rankings in the world. So people all over the world take English tests. Some countries are number one in the world. So where is Japan? We will look at that today. First of all, what are the most common tests in Japan? If you take an English language test in Japan, what test do you take? I'm looking for 5 different ones. TOEIC, okay, TOEIC test, and TOEFL, thank you. Eiken, very good. Eiken, sometimes called the Eiken step test. Again? ELTS, yes, very good. We'll talk about this, but ELTS is another test in Japan, very good. All right, and one more is the UNATE. We'll talk about this, but it's the United Nations Assessment Test of English. But there's another one. So let's take a look at some of these tests. Okay, TOEIC test, as you mentioned. Step Eiken test. TOEFL test. ELTS test, which Sarah just mentioned. And UNATE test, we'll talk about a little bit. If we look at these, right, all of these tests have an E in them, right? The E stands for what? English. And the T stands for? Yes?
Test.
Test, good. Test or testing. Test or testing. So all of these have an E and a T in them. For example, TOEIC is the test of English for international communication. That's TOEIC. Step Eiken, the STEP, S-T-E-P, Society for Testing English Proficiency. That's the STEP. TOEFL, Test of English as a Foreign Language. ELTS, International English Language Testing System. And the last one is the UNATE, United Nations Association's Test of English, which you might know as the Kokuden Eiken, right, in Japanese. So let's look at these. There are many different tests. So who are these tests for? Okay. Here we have the 5 tests, and here we have different people here. So if you are a business person, you're a businesswoman, a businessman, which test do you take? Okay, so yeah, so usually for business people, we'll take the TOEIC test, very good, okay? Students, if you are a Japanese student, you are not going to study in America, you are not going to study in England, you're a Japanese student in Japan, which test do you take? Eiken, perfect, very good job, okay? If you want to study in America, you want to go to a university in America, which test do you take? TOEFL, that's correct. Yes, okay. And if you want to study in England, which test do you take? Yes, ELTS, very good, right? And if you want to have a challenge, you can take the United Nations test. This is the most difficult test in Japan. The most difficult test, the United Nations test. To take the United Nations test, it's an interview test for 15 minutes. You have to speak in English talking about the United Nations. Like, what is the most difficult challenge facing the United Nations today? Or what do you think about changing Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution? So it's very, very complicated, difficult topics in English. So again, TOEIC for business people, Eiken for students, TOEFL, students who want to study in America, ELTS, students who want to study. We have 5 flags here. Here's your trivia time. Sarah, you can't play, I'm sorry, okay? Well, let's start here. This flag is what country?
United Kingdom.
Good, the UK, very good. What country is this? Canada, that's correct. Which one is this? Australia, good.
Ireland.
Ireland. And this one here?
New Zealand.
New Zealand, exactly, right? Here is an overview of the tests. We can see these tests here and when they started. Please notice 3 of these tests, the TOEIC, STEP, and United Nations tests. These are all Japanese tests. These were created in Japan by Japanese people for Japanese people. These are all Japanese tests, actually. TOEIC test, high score is 990, right? And score is between 10 and 990. This test has been going since 1979, but they did make some updates. They changed the TOEIC test in 2006, right? So first of all, your TOEIC score. Kazumi, when was the last time you took the TOEIC test?
About 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Okay, so you're right on the borderline because the TOEIC score is good for 2 years. After 2 years, then it's just gone. Okay, but your TOEIC score is good for 2 years. So you took the new TOEIC test. We'll talk about this, but they updated the test in 2006. Okay. ACAN test has 7 grades, EQ, NEQ, pre-EQ, NEQ, SANQ, different Qs. More than 80 million people have taken the ACAN test. TOEFL test, originally was a paper test. Now you can take internet testing. Okay. IELTS gives you a score from 0 to 9. In 2012, 2 million people in 130 countries took this test. UNATE is basically similar to the STEP. It's called the Kokuden ACAN. So it also has grades. It has 6 grades. And again, for the highest grade, the highest 2 grades, you have to have an interview test. Okay. So let's look at the TOEIC test. The new TOEIC test started in 2006. So the TOEIC test was going for a long time. But some people said, oh, the TOEIC test is not good, it's not good. And there's a couple of reasons. The original TOEIC test was American English only. So it's very nice for Japanese people. Most Japanese people study American English. But in the world, there are many kinds of English, right? So the new TOEIC test for the listening section, it is not just American English, it's everything. American, Australian, Canadian, British, New Zealand. So many different accents, Irish and such. So it's a more difficult listening section now. 2 biggest changes. 1, speakers from all over the world. Number 2, there was a part of the test here, an error spotting task. Like here is a sentence, he did not want to go to the park then because of the weather. And you choose A, B, C, or D. Which part is wrong? Which part is wrong? Tomoko, which part is wrong?
C.
Yes, very good. So this part is wrong, so you would choose C. They decided for the TOEIC test is for business people. So this kind of practice you don't need in business. Business people don't need this. So they took it off the test. They do have a TOEIC speaking and writing test. Many people complain, like the TOEIC test has no speaking. So you can have a high TOEIC score and not speak well. Or you could speak very well and have a low TOEIC score. So they did also make the TOEIC speaking and writing test, same year, 2006. It has a 20-minute speaking test, 60-minute writing test, 0 to 200 points for each section, 0 to 400 points total. Okay. And again, this is designed to judge your English in a work environment. If you are working in English, speaking business English, how is your English? Here's a sample question from the TOEIC test. This is an example of a listening section. On the TOEIC test, you will hear, on a CD, you will hear, where is the meeting room? And you will hear 3 answers, A, B, C. A, to meet the new director. B, it's the first room on the right. C, yes, at 2 o'clock. Of course, the answer then is B, and you put B. This is a sample TOEIC listening question. This is a sample test question from the STEP ACAN. This is actually STEP ACAN EQ, highest level. This is for an interview. This is so you have to speak English at the interview. There are two main parts to it. You receive a card and you read a story. Here is a story here, and then the interviewer will ask you questions about the story. So you have to understand the story and talk about the story in English. The second part, there's a story, a cartoon here, 3 parts, and you have 20 seconds to read this. You read this in 20 seconds, and then you have to tell the story in English for 2 minutes. And the story must start with this. One day, Mr. Sato was asked something in English by a customer at his bookstore, and you have to tell the story. So this is a sample of the ACAN interview test. The TOEFL test is designed for students who want to study in America. Basically, there were many students that wanted to study in America, so the American universities got together. They said, we need to make a test. We need to test the English ability of all of the students who want to come to America, so they made this. This test is for people who want to go to a university in America. So the test is for university students. The vocabulary is very difficult vocabulary. You practice reading like a university textbook. You read a lot, and here you have to understand what you read. What is the main idea of the passage? And choose the best answer. Here's a sample from the IELTS. Same idea here in England. Many students wanted to go to England to go to university, so the universities came together and decided, let's make a test so we can check everybody's English ability. This is from the interview portion of the IELTS, the speaking portion, and you have to talk about something. Like, let's talk about your hometown or village. For example, what kind of place is it? What's the most interesting part of your town, village? What kind of jobs do people have? Let's take a look at Japan. How does Japan rank internationally? So all around the world, people take English tests to see how good their English is. So how is Japan? We will look at 3 comparisons, 3 things. Number 1, TOEIC scores. So we have like 48 countries. 48 countries took the TOEIC test. So how is Japan scored? Okay. Out of 48 countries, Japan was number 40th. Now, this is from the Wall Street Journal last month. This is the most recent information. Wall Street Journal last month, 2 months ago in July, Japan ranks 40th out of 48 countries in TOEIC scores. Okay. As we look at the TOEIC information, this is actually 2013. But these are the different areas in the world: South America, Asia, North America, Africa, and Europe. The red part here is for reading scores. The light purple part here is for listening. So we have reading and listening. Basically, Europe scored the highest. Europe has the highest scores for TOEIC. Of course, people speak English every day. They speak English a lot in Europe, right? The lowest in the world was South America. Second lowest was Asia for listening and reading. Out of the 48 countries here, here's Japan at number 40, right here. So it's kind of a little bit lower on the list. And also, out of 7 million people from about 150 countries that took the test in 2013, we can see how Japan ranks. There's a story about Japan taking the TOEIC test. The average TOEIC score in Japan, the average score is 512, right? High score is 990. If you wanted to be an English teacher in Japan, then before you had to have about 900. And I think they just increased it maybe 950. So you need about 900, 950 to be an English teacher in Japan. The Average score in Japan is 512. Just below Japan is this country. Good man, excellent. Yeah, this is Thailand. Very nice job. Right? So this is Thailand here, 493. And which country is this? And Mexico, average score 535. Okay. Now let's take a look at the number 1 and number 2 countries in the world for TOEIC. Number 1 country in the world for TOEIC would be what country? Number 1, Bangladesh. Which Bangladesh is very interesting for me because they have the same Japanese flag, but it's green. I don't know the history or why or which flag was first, but they have the same flag as Japan except it's green. But yeah, Bangladesh, highest score was 895. Number 2 is India with 861. Of course, both of these countries have a long history with England, and basically that's why many people speak English. And the average score in Japan is 512. The average score in South Korea is 632. So actually they're doing better than Japan for English. And in China was 716. Again, all of these numbers you have to be careful. For example, in Japan, this is all of the Japanese people, all Japanese people who take the TOEIC test, and many Japanese people take TOEIC tests. Here in China, it's probably only 2 cities. It's probably Shanghai and Beijing. It's probably only the highest level students at the best universities taking the test. So the average for regular Chinese people would be much lower, but for the people who took the TOEIC test was 716. Here's a new test here. This is the English Proficiency Index, and this started in 2011. And basically this is based on over 2 million test takers who take a test online. So you take a test online and answer the questions. This shows the results. Here's the world, right? And I know this is very small here, but basically for English proficiency in the world, the pink colors has the highest English, America, obviously England, Australia, and some other countries. Next level, dark blue, many European countries speak English very well, right? Then you go to other European areas for the 3rd rank. 4th rank for the medium level would be including Japan, here India, Indonesia, Argentina, and different countries. Here are the top 10 tests for the English Proficiency Index. Number 10 is Slovenia. Number 9, Hungary. Number 8, Poland. Number 7, Finland. Number 6, Austria. Number 5, Denmark. Number 4, Estonia. So these are all European countries. We can see that European countries score very, very high on English tests. Okay? So let's see the top 3 countries here. What do you think? Which countries, based on the EPI test, which countries have the highest score? I think we did pretty well here. Number 3 is the Netherlands, which is in Europe. Number 2 is Norway. And number 1 is Sweden. Okay. Very beautiful city here. And people do speak English very well. Basically, they asked, the question is why? Why do they speak English so well? 1, yes, it's in Europe, so they use English every day. Number 2, some of their native languages are similar to English. For example, maybe Korean and Japanese are fairly similar, so maybe if you study Korean, it's easy to study Korean. For European languages, Swedish and English are a little bit close, so it's easier for them to study. Also, they have English every day in their lives. People read the English newspaper every day. There's English on TV every day. Not with where they change the voices, but it's actually listening to English every day, reading English every day. So all Swedish people are very comfortable with English. In Asia, the highest scoring country was Malaysia, Singapore, India. Again, all of these countries have a strong relationship with England. Hong Kong as well. South Korea came in at number 24, and Japan was number 26, actually, for Asian countries. There are 4 main conclusions from this test. This test said, okay, they looked at these countries, and they looked at all of the English ability, and they came up with 4 main points. Point number 1, countries with a lot of exports, countries that export things, you sell things to other countries, countries that have more exports have higher English ability. Also, income, countries that have, people have higher salaries and more money, then you have higher English ability. So higher exports, higher income equals higher English ability. Another one is English proficiency levels are changing at different rates, including a few countries with declining English skills. So every country is different. Every country is different. Some countries are improving quickly. South Korea is improving very quickly. Some countries are improving slowly. Maybe Japan is improving slowly. Every country is different, and they're going up and down at different rates. Okay. Third point, Europeans speak English very well. So Europe is the highest area for speaking English. South America and Central America, we call this Latin America, has the worst English ability. And the last point is how much money spent on English training does not equal the amount of progress made over time. If you spend a lot of money on English lessons, maybe you improve, maybe you don't, right? There's not a strong connection. You can improve your English without spending a lot of money, or you can spend a lot of money and not improve your English. So there is no strong connection. These are the 4 main points from this test. Now there's another test as well, the Business English Index, which was created by the Global English Corporation in 2011. You can see here, Global English started in 2011. Okay. They give scores based from 1 to 10. So beginner, basic, intermediate, and advanced. If you are beginner level, then you can communicate using 1 or 2 words, very simple conversations and such, but you cannot have a long conversation in English. Basic, you can understand English presentations, like today, you can understand English presentations, but you do not speak a lot, right? Okay. Intermediate here, you can actively talk and negotiate in meetings, and advanced means you can communicate with native English speakers at the same pace, right? The average score of all of the Business English Index was 4.75 in 2013 out of 10. So this is worldwide, this is the English level, and also 30% of people were in the beginner area here. There are many, many countries here, actually 77 countries here, from the highest, which was the Philippines. Actually, for business English, Philippines came in number 1. We talked about before studying English in the Philippines. English is considered one of their official languages, so they are comfortable speaking English. They scored number 1 for business English, Philippines. The lowest over here, Honduras, Colombia, Mexico, Chile, El Salvador, Brazil, South American countries scored very, very low. Japan, out of 77 countries, came in at number 50. Number 50 for business English. The ability to use business English at work. South Korea was number 23. Taiwan was number 31. And China was number 34. They took a survey in 2010. They took a survey of 26,000 global employees in 152 countries. So these are workers all over the world. They took a survey and they asked, number 1, do you need to speak English at work? Do you need to speak English at work? Kazumi, do you need to speak English at work? Yes. Tomoko, do you need to speak English at work? Yes, right? So the question is English required? Do you need to speak English at work? What percent of these workers said, yes, I need to speak English at work? What percent? 92%. They asked these workers, do you need to speak English at work? 92% of people said yes. And they asked them, okay, you need to speak English. Is your English good enough? Is your English level now good enough to speak English at work? So what percent said yes? Best, it was 7%. So 92% of people said, yes, I need to use English, and only 7% yes, my English is good enough. Okay. So here's a question for you. What can Japanese people do to improve their English, right? So Japan basically, Japanese people study English a lot, study English in school, but compared to around the world, the scores are basically pretty low, right? So the question is, what do Japanese people need to do to improve the English language? Okay. Food for thought means please think about this, please think about this. They asked some teachers in Japan, they talked about English studies in Japan. In Japan, from the Japan Times, 76% of elementary school students liked studying English, right? So now they started teaching English from elementary school. The students like English, which is very good. In 2004, there was a survey. 14.8% of high school English teachers spoke mostly English in class. Of course, for an English class, speaking English is very important, but in Japan, only 14.8% of English teachers speak mostly English in class. Mostly they're speaking Japanese, okay? In the first year classes. In Korea, it's 32%, so they have more English-only classes. In 2011, they found that 70% of teachers use grammar translation method. So they are teaching you, in high school they teach you to think in Japanese and then translate to English, right? Actually, it's a very, very bad idea. And even the Japanese government, MEXT, they have never recommended using grammar translation. So the way that English is taught in regular public Japanese schools is actually not very good. So that needs to be changed in the future as well. Thank you very much for coming to today's training. As always, we'll have a questionnaire with some questions. We'll be passing those out to you now, so please take some time to fill those out. And again, we really do appreciate your time. Thank you very much, everyone.